Otura. Start. La. Oh. Namo Guru Be. Namo Buddhaya. Namo Dharamaya. Namo Sanghaya. Namo Guru Be. Namo Buddhaya. Namo Dharamaya. Namo Sanghaya. Namo Guru Be. Namo Buddhaya. Namo Dharamaya. Namo Sanghaya. Sa xi bi xi ju xi mian do zheng. Ri zha bo ling xi nian de jian ban de san jie xin de mian de bu wai. Zhou gu nam da xin la ju ba ra xiu ye de mong gu ru ru. Men da la ga na ya da ya mi. Dāng tsō jī tsō nō mō lā chāng chū parā tō dāng nī jiao sū mō jī. Dā jī chī shī jī bī tsō nō mō jī zhō lā bīn jī sāng jī zhō bā shū sāng jī chī dāng tsō jī tsō nō mō. Chāng chū parā tō dāng nī jiao sū mō jī. Dā jī chī shī jī bī tsō nō mō jī. Zhō lā bīn jī sāng jī zhō bā shū sāng jī chī dāng tsō jī tsō nō mō. Chāng chū par tō dāng nī jiā sū mō jī. Dā jī chī shī jī bī tsō nō mō. Zhō lā bīn jī sāng jī zhō bā shū 인 jī tō rā tāng wā jī rā. Ai kō sī 인 jī tō rā tāng wā jī rā.
I go for refuge, full enlightenment, to the Buddha, Dharma, and Supreme Assembly. By the merit of listening to the Dharma, may I achieve Buddhahood for the sake of all beings.
야, 마주 남게 타다니 비심제 탐지게 된도 돕자라 남에 봐 영다바 조배 상지이 고마른 보지 진네 토벌차 디치도 담비 주여서 무슨 연배 꾸는 근주게 리바나 리바세다 데셈바슈 다 강셈바체베 담비 주디 다 장주 람비 침메 되니 활동 침메 깝게 되니 나 가자 고에게 다 타랑기 다 뭐 타랑기 되바 강기 제바스 다 가자 고에 들어와 어다 디랑주비다 디랑주비 딘지 고에게 디마 다 무튼이 슈에하데르 디마 무튼이 슈긴스
So begin by generating a very clear motivation in your mind for listening to this teaching, to do whatever it takes to achieve the highest supreme state of perfect Buddhahood in order to benefit all mother sentient beings who are infinite, as vast as the ends of space. And the teaching that we are discussing is within the great treatise on the stages for the path to enlightenment, or the Lamrim Chenmo. And within this, there's the large section called the Great Insight section. And then there's the subcategory in that of refuting the object to be negated, and then determining which school to follow, the Madhyamikas, of the two Madhyamikas, either the Prasangika or the Svatantrika. And then the section, the most immediate subsection within that is refuting the necessity of the autonomous reasons. And so we're still going through that explanation. So we'll continue now.
Oh yeah. 다 도시네다 같은 데 쉬어야 되는마. 다와 잡비 제수 정가 되바 나래체. 산이 된다며 사용원이 마인데 중화 인비실 룽신노 시 독에 바와 소소 거발라스. 된담도 중화 인비실 시거나 랑게 마두블라스. 군주도 중화 인비실 시거나 치공 어무모라 마두보 시 다마두바. 나 대다마두바 미조나 티니기 고네스 마두베 라스 다마두바 차바랑기 켈랑바다가 로시에셀라스다 다든다디 인다에게 강라 치사기 인다디가 들어 쯧바실레소와 아니 에게 가리레 반에다 와차보 치센나라 아니 가리레 인다 아니 디 지난 경우도 개와집이 교육에 대단한 요바 대신십에 송배실 빼나 아니 가리레 냥을 대와 시와시 송바시 노스노다 디 가르틸라나 링바자니 되니 빠는다 와차베 가해줘와 오다 딜라 여기 강기다 특색의 공부 딜라다 가지기 다 공부 좀 제수 대시 치지로 된데 중앙에다 디 가지 민다와 니어 디가스로와 다 다와 잡이 제수 정화 되바 나리에서도 다 반대 다와 잡아기 되니 슝기 제수 장니 아니 마 랍겐기 포용 알아봐 가지기 되니 디시 로바지 자여 디시 치지로 양다바 많이 바로와 어디 가르치스나 다 딘데베 들어와 어더니 다 마주비 균 다지 다 마주비 거네 다 가리래 딘지 마주비 균도 세지로와 딘전 춘들와 딘지 최진 심마조마세 딘지 마주바 주고도 빼나 아니 세게 다 되게 균 당사 다디 아니 또게 봐와 나라 그ጆ로 로벨인데 지기 또게 봐와 나라 그조기로 다지요 가스나 사디 변담에 사용원이 많은데 중화인 비치르스 배나 룽신노 시비 따또고 거는 거와들라 딘다와들라 아니 낸다디 가리레 나 변담에 온도 신이라고 군주부 온도 신이라고 다 되게더니 딘지 마주바 주고도스 따딜라 아니 파게 대신셰비 송부여지 세데 빼자해줘와 어디 딜라 딘다 로벨인데 지기 저런 게 제라마라더니 제라마에 드니 대신셰비 송부여지 세데 아니 되는 담발 당디니 군소바 강고 온도신의 수말했으니 딱봐 제바디 아니 되게 균세나 때네 저런 게 제라마와라 딘지 마주바리라기도 왔스티나 아니 딘다디 사주죠 되는데 사용고 많이도 중화 인비시 시비 따들라야 딘지 마주바 주그레스 디 딜라 따딜라 자와리 우리는 따디 마르와 가서나 여기 강라 로벨인디지기 아니 지난 경우나 주 된나마 달라미게도 유비시를 빼나 셰바요바 니시는 어떤 딜라 딘지 마주비 균 땅거와 다 가지기 된다 반대 다와트비 되니 제수 장화 등은 병하라바 가지기 딘지 마주비 균이 딜라 땅와레스 사주제 된다면 사용원이 마인데 중화인비시 룽 빼나 룽신로 세들라로와 아니 중화인비시스는 된다마 중화인비시스니 꼬나니 아니 가리래 nga go uma pala ma dubare strangla ma dubs ro ta kunzubu ondu kunzubu 중화 인베시스니 거나 치고 되니 가리래 ngoma ma dubos 오다 텐데와디 계세 대 마주바 미조나 아니 저랑게로와 아니 대니고네 다 마주바 하더니 얘기 가리래 얘기 제라마라 교연 땅윤디 아니 지 가리래 지난 경우번에 깨와치비 규여데 제다는 디신십이 송외지 세들라 디신십이 송외지 세들라더니 덴반이게 따바치니 까요라 어디 까와디 간르스 차기레스 그래서 덴반이게 따바치니 안 디신십이 송외지선 되는다마 송와레 군주도 송와레스니 로와 어디라 따바치니 따마주비 교연 땅도 와서 어디다 찍바레스니 다 공바되어 두었습니다 공바 놓아지 로와 가지되게 디니고네 마주나 따마주비 차바랑게 켈랑바다 갈로스 아니 갈로스디가레 디신십이 송외지 세들라 아니 대만이게 딱 받치니 딱 맞주 봐 해샤스니 오다 로벨 니지 저런 게 캐랑 받다 계기도 소다 디당 사디 된다면 사용고 많이데 중앙이 어디 따 디니라 따 맞주바 찍바해 소다 디 가지기 자와래 어디 자주디 노와디 다 가지기 돼봐 어디 가지 당부디 있기도 어
그래서 그래서 된다면 중앙만 비라디 그래서 중앙에 비시로 된다면 중앙에 비시로야
디 중화시여봐 사주 메루스 지신디 중화로와 자사디 된담바디니 사용고 많이데 중화인비에 지슨 또기 봐 나라 따주 거래 어디라
디 수가 디 제대마와라 그래 제당 그래
어디 또기 봐 나라 아니 뭐 말할 거래 가서는 로벨인디
수가 그래
왜 말을 따주다 홍말을 거 가져라 어디라 띵지 마주비 교연 땅바디나 지바레 스틸라바 근데 치사 나라 숨조디 딜라 자와 스타 마주비 교연디
Okay. So here in the English translation, in the current version that I have is page 263, and it's right after the quotation. So that's the indented section. So the next paragraph after that. Some Tibetans who consider themselves followers of Chandrakirti interpret this passage in the following way. Baba Viveka's Blaze of Reasons and other Svatandrika texts put forward the following syllogism. Subject, earth, predicate is not ultimately of the nature of solidity. Reason, because it is an element, example like wind. They say that Chandrakirti refutes this approach as follows. If you posit because it is an element ultimately as the reason, then it is not established for us. If you posit because it is an element conventionally as the reason, then it is not established for the opponent, the essentialist. If this argument does not induce you to accept that your own reason is not established, then you contradict your belief that a reason that is not established from either of those 2 points of view, i.e. conventionally or ultimately, must be a reason that is not established. Okay, so here what we're looking at is this quotation from Chandrakirti from the Clear Words, this text of the Clear Words, which was that paragraph which we had gone through last class. So this is looking at, the way that Chandrakirti actually has. So the actual quote from above from Chandrakirti's Clear Words, he referenced a reason or syllogism that Baba Viveka gives in his own text called the Blaze of Reasons, Baba Viveka's text, the Blaze of Reasons, that he's giving a syllogism towards the Vaibhashika, the great exposition proponents. So in that, if you look back up in that paragraph, it says, the causes that serve to bring about the internal sensory faculties and such are existent without qualification. This is the case because the Tathagata said they are. For whatever the Tathagata has said is accurate, as in the case of his teaching that nirvana is peace. Sorry, so this is the Vaibhashika school giving a reason, giving a syllogism to Baba Viveka. This is how the Vaibhashikas posit their syllogism. Okay, so I said that wrong. So that's the reason given by the Vaibhashikas, the syllogism there. And so what we have now at Tsongkhapa, his own commentary, is he's actually going into an explanation about a mistaken way of interpreting this passage from Chandrakirti. Okay, so this is the first part here. Then next is going to go and explain what the actual correct interpretation or what the actual meaning is. So in this mistaken interpretation, what is it? What is he saying about the mistaken interpretation? So this is from other Tibetan scholars that interpreted this passage incorrectly. They said that the meaning of that portion of text in that passage is that when Baba Viveka is giving, the reason Chandrakirti is pointing out this this criticism by Baba Viveka is to show how, just like the subject and predicate are not established, so also the reason is not established for sufficient reason. So how are they connecting the reasons though? Well, they're saying that because Bhava Viveka says, gives a reason in his text that this syllogism here, take the subject earth, it is not ultimately the nature of solidity because it is an element like the wind. So the misinterpretation is to say that Chandrakirti is referencing this syllogism, and he's saying that just like in that syllogism, the reason is not established, and Bhavaveka recognizes that, then similarly, in Bhavaveka's own reason that he posits towards the, to refute production from self, which is the reason from before, take the subject, the eyes and so forth, they are not produced from themselves, ultimately produced from themselves because they exist like consciousness, for example, like consciousness. Okay, so that was the reason, that Chandrakirti initially is, was looking at. So the misinterpretation of other Tibetan scholars is to say that just like this reason that that Bhavaveka is saying the reason is not established, take the subject earth, it is not ultimately the nature of solidity because it is an element like the wind. So likewise, the reason is not established in the other case that Bhavaveka himself posits to disprove or refute self-production. Okay, so he's asked, so they're saying that because, what's the reason? Because if you posit, right, is it an element ultimately, or is it an element conventionally? You have to choose one of those two. Then for for the Bhashika, one of them won't be established. For the Madhyamaka, the other won't be established. So therefore, the reason is not established. So they're looking at it that way, and then they're actually not applying the particular analysis that Chandrakirti is making of the text of Bhavaveka. They're applying it not to this reason that is right above in that passage, that the causes that serve to bring about the internal sensory faculties and such are existent without qualification. This is the case because the Tathagata said they are, for whatever the Tathagata said is accurate, as in the case of his teaching that nirvana is peace. Instead, they're applying it to a different syllogism. Okay, so they're not. So even though the passage above says, so are you asking, right? About Bhavaveka's own text, he's saying, are you saying that ultimately the Buddhist, the Tathagata says so? Is it in terms of ultimate or in terms of conventional? They're instead relating it to this other syllogism.
뭐야? 가정이 중화 점식 거나 나 리셰기스 아 마주베스 고바이노 셰세로스 다 가지 니와 디게로다 다 가지 당부디 빠낸다와 잡이 시사기 지수 장화 되게 병하라 바치체 다 가지 니와 디게 따제 가야 마치베다 근데 법조설마경이 다 가지 디게 가서는 중화점 다 대니 관계제 개발도 마치비 중화점 다수가 와이나 세디 또그 바와는 그쪽에 다 다라체 된 사치죠 된 담배 사용 원이 많이데 중화인비에 지시비 댄시들라 가진 아마 대가를 된 담배 있고 중화라긴 바 군수비 중화스긴 배에서 딱 받치니 까와레스고로 디라딘 디네인상 아니 댄싱 마주비 교연도 세디 디라 땅아래서 그러 딱 가진 니와 되게 가르스나 대양 알아봐라와 디 가르스나 아니 대니 관계자 체발도 마치 중화점 식다수고나 아니 리시 세메드는 제바데스나 아니 디니에요 말이에요 대니 관계 체발도 마치 아니 중화진예 매완상 아니 된데왜 가서나 사주진 된다면 사용원이 중화인비에 지치비 띵지들라 안 된데왜 땀다 마주비 되니 교연도 와 어다 딘데게 거니 아니 다 마주비 교연도 빼나 저랑게 되니 가서나 제라마와라더니 가서나 제라마고 요게 띵식 아니 가스는 지난 경우는 깨와집이 규요데 대다 디신십이 숭배시 세저와 어디라더니 딱 받치니 로벨린지 까바로와 아니 디신십이 숭와데 되는다 봐 숭와래 되는 군들도 숭와래선 딱 받치니 어디 마인베 대니 강의장 마인베 디신십이 숭와지거나 땡세 마주와 주거리에서 어다 디니 아니 저런 게 켈랑바레스 다 돈도 같이 가지 니가기 아니 다 마주와데 로벨린지 켈랑와디 다 마주세 다 마주에 다디 아니 가리래 대원다 마사용 원이 많이데 중화인 비에지 어디 다들라 자니 그거와 어디 다 된다 되고라 지금 매와 되고 होला 거 까는 것도 없어
Again, keeper got it. Then Namadi dong.
ngama digi demban이게 딱 받치니로와 군수비
Dambani.
중화인 비실라긴 비 대원다 마 중화인 비실스니 그거인 베스 어디 또 군수도 있는데 지금 말 되는 지금 말에 인도는 다마도 교연도 세기로와 가진 이와 되게 된담도 군수비 따와 맞지 같이 되니 가야 많이 비 중화지 거와 있나 안 되니 가야 많이 비 중화지 요 말에 인사 땡세
Ale.
이것도 무슨 가진 이와 되게 들려자와요
Keeper de majebas lamna.
되니 아로와 되는 데마다 군수도 봐 가야 많이 비 중화 잠식 안 따라 거와 있나 아니 중화에 있나 대만이부 가능인 거래 대만이부 가야 많이 비 중화지 요 말에 인사 땡세 맞도 비 교연 주구래 그래서 어다 딘데스니까 와래서 거래스 가진 이와
So they say so. The next one is on the next page. So there's other misinterpretation from other Tibetan scholars. And there are those who say that Bhava Viveka is refuted because when he states just being an element as the reason without any specification, reason knowledge does not establish it. But Chandakirti's refutation of Bhava, okay, that's it. That's enough. Refuted because when he states just being an element as the reason without any specification, reason knowledge does not establish it. So there's these two ways of misinterpreting Chandakirti's point. So I think I said it a little bit wrong. It's not that the mistake is that they're relating Bhava Viveka's refutation of this reason given by the Vaibhashikas to this syllogism. Take the subject earth is not ultimately the nature of solidity because it is an element like the wind, whereas the correct syllogism that Chandakirti intended to relate it to, which again will be explained just immediately below in the next paragraphs, but it's the one that we've been talking about for the last several weeks, the last several classes, about take the subject eyes and so forth, right, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the mistake. Okay, so they're relating this analysis that Bhava Viveka makes of the Vaibhashika reason to another syllogism that Bhava Viveka himself put forward in the Blaze of Reasons, and that's not what Chandakirti intended. He didn't mean to apply it to or connect it to this syllogism, but to another syllogism, which Tsongkhapa is making that point. So how is it different here? So what it's saying is because it is an element, so that is not qualified by being anything. Again, that's the reason, right? So here they're looking at Chandakirti is pointing out how the reason is not established in Bhava Viveka syllogism. And so the misinterpretation looking at this syllogism, the earth is not ultimately the nature of reality because it is an element like the wind, that is the way that they're interpreting it is to say that just like when the Vaibhashika posited the reason, because the Buddha said it, and then Bhava Viveka asks, well, did he say it in relation to the ultimate or in relation to the conventional? Then here, this second misinterpretation is looking at this syllogism and saying, well, the reason is not established for Bhava Viveka is because he's saying because it is an element without being qualified by anything. But in reality, there is no element that is beyond qualification as being either conventionally true or ultimately true. Okay, so this is how they're saying that that's why the reason is not established, because again, Bhava Viveka sort of asked the same question to the Vaibhashikas, and so here when Chandakirti has finding a flaw in Bhava Viveka's thinking and his syllogisms, then it's because he's not qualifying the reason, because it is an element. He's not qualified it as either being conventionally or ultimately. And so that means that Bhavavega himself has a contradiction in his own text, because he went and made that analysis and found the flaw in the Vaibhashika position. Now he's giving a syllogism that has the same exact flaw in it. Therefore, he's got an internal contradiction. But again, this is a misinterpretation. Okay, so Tsongkhapa is going to go on and say why that's not the correct way of seeing Chandrakirti's point in the passage from the clear words. And again, the difference between, I just clarified with Geshe, what's the difference between the first misinterpretation and the second one? And it's the first one is saying, you're saying if you posited it as an element ultimately or an element conventionally, then for one of the schools, right, for the essentialists, then it wouldn't be established to say that it's an element conventionally. They accept that it ultimately exists. And if you said it because it's an element conventionally, because it's an element ultimately, then that wouldn't be established for the Madhyamikas. Therefore, the reason is not established. Okay, so that's the first misinterpretation, whereas the second one is just the fact that it's not qualified makes it the reason not be established, because there is no element that isn't qualified as either conventional or ultimate. So that's a little difference there. Well,
yeah. 도체 다 딘다위 추기 수인진반이 칙석이 공부 때문에 많이시 로벤티한 대다도 셰바 마인베 루기니가라 칠로 치즈로도 마이노 스타트인다 가진가진이도 와 나라바 가진이기 되바지고도 와 오다 뒤되바 아니 그외디 아니 가래 딘데왜 다 가서나지 사주죠 된다면 사용 마인데 중앙인비 지집이 딘지디 시작하게 돈이더니 다마주비 교인데 땅와를 세디 루벨린데 반년 다와 잡아기 루벨린데 제라 균주체 얘기 직세나라와 반년 다와 잡아기 루벨린데 지 까르와 딘지마주비 교인지 딘지마주와디 라니게 켈랑바레스 내게 강게질 지진입이 되는데니 라니게 켈랑바 니도 호스토게와디 라니 켈랑바 니도 호스 직세나라 숨교제라와 오다 디기 반년 다와 잡아기 되니 로벨린데 지 가수디 텐데베 따디 시작이 전에 딴지마주와레스에디 가야디 오다 디 아니 가리래 시세기 드니 공부야 말했어. 시세 된다 값수 시에기 관계 질서에 되게 된다대 대 말했어. 마이싱 로변 대한 대다로 쉐바 마이메 로벨린디 지기장 딘지 마주바 켈랑바레 세데로와 된다디 아니 가리래 된다마 사용고 마인데 중앙인 비치를 세워 어다 딘데베 딘지 되게 온도치네 딘지 마주바 켈랑바데 말했어. 마인베 드니 로벨린디 지기드니 가스나 케랑라 조주데 요 말에 반년 다와트비 균주줄라 드니 지기요 말에 마주와 되스나 야니마두스 마 용에디 가스나 랑주기 따고인데 로벨린디 지기 아니 가스나 친한 공원은 된다마 달래 미제디 유비실 맨나 쉐바 요바 니시노스 오다 딘데비 유비치 세디라 아니 로벨린디 지기 가리래 아니 딘주 관계 이제 제발도 마치비 아니 믹소 치삼바 추진 징그레 세들라더니 추진 시마주비 교요레 세디 딘딩지 마주발라 교요바데 켈랑와레 스니 교연 당서 내기니 마 방진이 용어와 인도선이 다 가지니 되게 다 신다지라 자야디 아니 베드고를 빠낸다 와타비 칙세기 딘다 값수 시에기 공간 된다 지내요 말이스 오다디 아니 딘데 드시 자야데 드시 친지로래 칙세기 딘 공바 친지로도 드시 자워래 딘 노르바래 다 제르미지기 가스나 다 딘데기 다 슝두 스마 용디 빠루라 양 바직 대시 lokpa 잡는데 팀미 대와 내가 채산도 주 뛰는 순거래스 인도선이다 딘데와디 아니 많이 비균세 다른 디올라 마 카세오다 마 되용도
But Chandrakirti's refutation of Bhavaviveka does not proceed in this way. This is not at all the purport of the clear words, nor does Bhavaviveka accept any such thing. Hence, these individuals misrepresent both systems. So this is just to summarize that Tsongkhapa was pointing out these two misinterpretations of earlier Tibetan scholars had made of Chandakirti's passage in the clear words that was just cited above. So they're again looking at their, those misinterpretations are taking the syllogism, take the subject earth. It is not ultimately of the nature of solidity because it is an element like wind, and they're using that as they're interpreting Chandakirti to be saying that that's the reason that shows Bhava Viveka's, or that's the syllogism that shows Bhava Viveka's internal contradiction when Bhava Viveka goes and refutes and criticizes the Vaibhashikas. Well, the same criticism falls on him, the same exact flaw falls on his own syllogisms, and this is the one they're connecting it to, the syllogism with the subject earth. Okay, so that's again a misinterpretation of Chandakirti's refutation of Bhaviveka. And so, and again, what it's saying, as you see in Chandakirti, passage that's above there on page 263, where he says, since it is through such considerations that he asserts that the reason is not established, the reason and so forth are not established for him, and any argument that posits a reified thing as a reason, and hence all probative arguments would fall apart. So he's just pointing out that this, Bhaviveka is making this contradiction in his own writings. And so the misinterpretation is connecting it to the wrong syllogism of Bhaviveka. Okay, so that's what's wrong with it. The correct syllogism to be connecting it to is the one that had been cited, a while earlier, and again, Tsongkhapa will come back to, which is take the subject, the eyes, and so forth. They are not produced from themselves because they exist. For example, consciousness. Okay, that's the one that's correct. And how do we know that? Well, again, because there's the whole discussion in Chandakirti's text that, in the actual order of the text, the writing itself, where he goes through and he talks about Bhaviveka's position, about how you can't have something that's completely, not qualified. I'm sorry, that you have to have something that's completely not qualified as the subject, that's required for, the right kind of syllogism. And, then Chandakirti goes through point by point by point, and this is the reason, this is the syllogism that Chandakirti had just in the previous section of text. So Tsongkhapa is just pointing out that whoever made these misinterpretations just didn't ascertain the correct meaning of Chandakirti's text and the point that he's really trying to make. They just misinterpreted, didn't understand the meaning correctly. And so now he'll explain the right way to interpret it.
Oh yeah. 원나 지들 인념나 관계치를 지견입에 되는디니스 디 라니기 계랑바지 노시에 숭배 지게 셰바니스 마르치비 최진마 주비 최당 대된질라양 조와 숭바 되니 디 데마타도 흉대 숭배소 스타딘다 얘게 군는다 공도로와 딘지마 주바 로벨인디지 계랑바레 세게 치사기 흉지도와 관계치 지견입에 되는디니 왔다 디기 된다디 아니 간절했으나 가진이기 시켜도 말해 간절했으나 아니 관계지 지게 셰바스네 공도 좋아 지게 가와 공도 셰바 낭싱스니와 공도 가루 인다디 되바 주바당 아니 되바 주베 디 로벨인디 지 되바 주니 로와 디가윤디 되 밑에와다 빼도 밑중어 땜바세지 대벨라 밑으로 밑에와 땜바세디 오다 되 밑에 가수 딘데왜 최진 심마 주비 균 요레스 가스나 딘주 관계 체벌도 체베더니 미 세메도 투나와지 요 말해스 매상 아니 딘데왜 아니 투난도 주비 최진 매상 딘이 최진 심마 주비 균도 스네 밖에 균 땅와줘로 어다디 여기 로벨린데 지기 거주기 다디 시자시네 미소 남게 제진은 된다마 달미제도 유배실 맨날 셰바요바 니신노스네 로벨린데 지기 텔라 미소 최진 지장바지 샤그레스 딘주 관계 체벌도 마치비 미지장바 샤그레스 믹점 대주 개발도 마치 믹치점 세메도 투난도 요래 세들아 어디 요 말에 스카즈나 믹치점 투난도 두바 메와디 아니 추비 세메니든 누구레 총아되게 장로게 계란기 마추비 세메니든 누구레 오마베 추비 세메니든 인자 세메도 투난오지 민도 스네 다디 추진주 세메도 투난 메완 디난신 띵지딜라야 세메도 투난 요 말에 스네 여기 다시샤지니 티 데마타도 디 송교의 슝디레스 디로와티 마르시베 추지마도 띵지 마주바 주수 숭바디 티 데마타도 슝디 숭베소 시디 진다 관계 지제님의 되되니 띵지 마주와디 로벨인데 지기 켈란바레 시선나나 숭회디 아니 가리 관계 따 여기 따디 시샤지니로와 이바디 티호 티제 데마타도 슝기 된다 깨지디 최와레 띵지 마주베로와 추진 시마주바디 낭신 로아 추진 투난도 주비다 세메주도 투난 매와인자 아니 저랑길라에 추진 시마주비 교연도 있어 추진 시마주비 교연디 아니 띵지딜라야 되니 띵지 마주비 교연 요바디 아니 애기 따디 시샤신데 조고와디 티 데마타도 디 슝도 쳐와레스 어인두자니 다 된다디 관계처리 지제시비 되는데니 라니게 켈랑바니도 세디 애기 따디 로아 되는다마 달미게도 유베지 시위 따디라 유베지 세드라더니 따 유바디 아니 치매 마주비 교연도 간스나 아니 딜라야한테는 치매도 투나와 요 말와 딘주 관계 개발도 마치비 요바점 중난이 디고 말에 가스나 다 딜라야한테는 가스나 투난도 주비더니 따 매상 아니 딘지 마주비 교연도 빼나 저랑 기티니 가스나 제다모와라 균지 치는데 디신십이 송베 지세들라더니 가르래 데니 관계 개발도 마치베 디신십이 송마지 샤메상 아니 딘지 마주비 교여와디 저랑 제다모와라 바 교연 땅와디 나신 저랑라 출도나 아니 저랑 딜라 총바레 딘지 마주와디로 안자 디 저랑 기 켈랑바레 딜라 자고레 스타 제름지 디송도스
Well then, how is the passage to be interpreted? In the passage that states, for the logician himself accepts implicitly the points we have just made, the phrase, the points we have just made, refers to the previously explained method for showing that the subject is not established, and also to the application of that method to the reason, for the text states this in the immediately preceding passage. This being the case, it follows that the valid cognitions, such as perceptions, that establish the subject and reason are inevitably either mistaken or non-mistaken. Okay, so and then the rest just explains. Well, I'll just read it and then you can read it again. If you posit an object found by a mistaken consciousness as the reason, or as another part of the syllogism, then it will not be established for the essentialist. If you posit an object found by a non-mistaken consciousness in that role, our own valid cognitions will not establish it. Therefore, autonomous reasons and subjects are not established. This is what we explained above, and is the meaning of Chandrakirti's phrase, the points we have just made. Okay, so this is like the first part of that passage above in the clear words, where it says, this is so for this logician Bhavaviveka himself accepts implicitly the points we have just made. That was the first sentence, right? On page 263 there. So that's what Tsongkhapa is referencing. So how is he proving that the other interpretations are wrong? Because again, he's just looking at the part of the text that just came before. So when Chandrakirti says the points we have just made, you have to take the part of the text that came just before this part. That's what he's referring to when he says the points we just made. So that's the mistake that those misinterpretations made, is that they didn't connect it to what Chandrakirti had just written in the previous section of text. They connected it to some other syllogism that was in a different part of the text, or that Bhavaviveka makes elsewhere, and that Chandrakirti wasn't directly referring to. So he's referring to this then, that because again the way that Baba Viveka is accepting his position about the flaw in the Vaibhashika's syllogism, then the same kind of flaw applies to himself when he goes to make his syllogism, take the subject, the eyes, and so forth. They are not produced from themselves because they exist, for example, consciousness. And when he says that reason, that syllogism, then he emphasizes or he insists that there has to be the subject that is not qualified by any particular qualification, right? A non-qualified subject, because it has to be a commonly appearing subject, something something for which there's a shared experience between the challenger and defender, or commonly appearing subject, and how the and so that's why you just say the eyes in general without qualifying them as anything. But the way that Chandrakirti had already refuted that is to say that, well, there is no just in general, way of, common way of understanding the eyes or anything as being established by valid cognition. There is no such common experience or common appearance because for the Madhyamakas, the eyes are an object found by mistaken valid cognition. For the essentialists, the eyes and so forth are objects found by non-mistaken valid cognition. Okay, so that's Chandrakirti had just made all those points before this passage in the text. So that's Tsongkhapa is pointing out that's clearly what he's referring to and why he says this is so for this logician Baba Viveka himself accepts implicitly the points that we have just made. It's referring to those points. So just like he pointed out how there's no commonly appearing subject, likewise, then there's no commonly appearing reason, and because for the same exact reason, so that's why the syllogism posited by Baba Viveka has the flaw of the flaw, and again, this is sort of a technical logic term, and the technical text on logic, which is called a flawed sign. It has the flaw or the problem of being not a flaw. It has the flaw of being a non-established sign, not established sign. Okay, so the sign is not established. So this is again sort of coming in the context here because he's saying that Baba Vega himself accepts that implicitly through his way of refuting the Vaibhashika's syllogism, and he's saying that that's Chandrakirti saying that that's the exact same flaw in your own reason. You accept it; it's a flaw for the Vaibhashikas. It's also it just lines up exactly with your own syllogism, the same flaw in the same way. So therefore, you kind of implicitly have to accept that the reason is that there's no commonly appearing reason. So the reason is not established.
Oh yeah. 대단한 딜 줄대 최진당 덴지 주비 웃음 답부 대 추마주 니레 미달라스 추비 니베 된 덴지라서 와 조나 오보마라 마주라스 마추비 니베 된 데다도 조나 랑게 체메 미주베스 랑주기 다당 최진라서 와 마주바 운도 셰바 지제 셰비 되노스다 이게 강라 식색이 중디너라 아니 근데 강게 지제 셰비 되는지 랑이 계랑바니도 세데 지제 공도 가리시에레스나 다 최근 대디는 심마주비 교육과 낭신 딘지 심마주와들 한데스나 최저의 딘지라서 받는 데 웃음 딜라드네 웃음 맞추비 니든 생배 다 추비 체면 니든다 맞추비 체면 니든 샤야기 체마디 웃음라샤 웃음 체마라 다 웃음 체마 맞추비 체면 니든도 주비 다 생배 추비 체면 웃음 체마와 니든도 주비 다 생배스와 다 추비 체면 니든 그때는 딘지 다 생하니 아니 ngoma gitini ti kelling mares kasna ngusumla mathuwaji shagorwa ngusum chubasingi kelling marwa inza ngusum karire ngusum chubi nyedön lawa inani ngomala ngusum chubi nyedönji shaamere ngomayulula ngusumi na mathubi sheba jingores inza ngusum chubi tseme nyedön shanani ngomala mathu tensikirwa tam ngusum mathubi tseme nyedön lawa inani umabala mathu 방스나 우마발라 아니 무슨데라 추시 인다디 무슨 시들라와 아니 뭐뭐 되바데 무슨 시들라 아니 가스나 타니비 로 자와인상 아니 돈이 무슨도 마도비 무슨 다 간다 딜라 인상 아니 딜라디니 가리는 거랬다 가스나 마투바치 샤게 말 추바 샤게래 인도산이 다 딘지라 소바 마투비 체면이 되잖아니 가스나 우마발라 마투 우마발라 아니 추비 체면이 되res 딘비 체마디 아니 가스나 추바레스 딘싱이 바치기 리비 추바레스 마투비 체면 하스나다 추비 체면이도 나와는 거에 뭐할 정말이 뭐 뭐할라 아니 추비 체마 용 말이 뭐 뭐에 체마되다 숙속이다 지난 거 믹솔라 소바 조직이 아니 무슨 마투바 켈린 거야 그래서 무슨 마투비 니도 켈리면서 무슨 추비 니도 주비 아니 따셔나니 바로 발라마투 무슨 마투비 니도 주비 따셔나니 우마발라 마투바 인상 아니 디니 강이 제벌도 마체비 아니 다 지상버지 되는 말이에요. 인도산에 마틴데 진상 아니 딘지 마주비 아니 콘도 계란게 디 켈랑가래 세디 콘도 켈레 지지시비 되 세저라 오다 여기 되게 값을 가야기 되는데 디레스
So this is going over again that sort of second half of this longer paragraph in the middle of the page. This being the case, it follows that the valid cognitions, such as perceptions that establish the subject and reason, are inevitably either mistaken or non-mistaken. If you posit an object found by a mistaken consciousness as the reason or as another part of the syllogism, then it will not be established for the essentialist. If you posit an object found by a non-mistaken consciousness in that role, our own valid cognitions will not establish it. Therefore, autonomous reasons and subjects are not established. This is what we explained above, and it is the meaning of Chandrakirti's phrase, the points we have just made. Okay, so this is looking again back at that portion of text from the clear words, that passage from the previous page, and it's pointing out how, Tsongkhapa is now pointing out how the actual correct interpretation of Chandrakirti's point, or the real point he is making, is that in the same way that he refutes Bhavaviveka's, in Bhavaviveka's syllogism, that he shows that the subject is not established, it has that flaw. Likewise, it has the flaw that the reason is not established, the sign or the reason is not established. So what's the way he did that? Again, just it applies the same way to the subject, to the sign here, as it applied to the reason in the previous explanation, from a few pages earlier, where he's showing that, well, there's the establishing consciousness, the valid cognition, is direct perception here. So the direct perception is going to be either a mistaken valid cognition or non-mistaken valid cognition. For the essentialists, if you say that it's an object found by a mistaken cognition, then it's not accepted by the essentialist, and therefore it's not established. The sign is not established for the essentialists. And if you say, and that's because for the essentialists, valid cognition, direct perceptions are necessarily non-mistaken. Okay, so they accept direct perceptions to be non-mistaken. If you say that it's an object found by non-mistaken direct perception, valid cognition, then that's not established for the Madhyamikas, because for Madhyamikas, all direct perceptions except for the direct perception, which is directly perceiving emptiness, all other direct perceptions are mistaken. Okay, they're mistaken because they are tainted by the imprints of grasping at truth, the truth grasping, perception, the truth cognition of truth, the truth grasping perception. So in cognition of true existence, not truth, but true existence, it means, right? So then when Baba Viveka says, okay, so when we're positing a reason, it also has to be not qualified by, either being an object found by a mistaken valid cognition or an object found by non-mistaken valid cognition. It has to just be just the generality, not qualified by anything. Chandakirti pointed out, well, just like for what Chandakirti is doing, it is pointing out that just like for the subject, you can't actually, nothing like that actually exists. For anyone, it's going to either have to be seen as something that is an object found by mistaken valid cognition or something found by non-mistaken valid cognition, right? You could say knowledge, right? It's known by mistaken knowledge or non-mistaken knowledge. Just like that for the subject, the same is true for the reason. Therefore, the reason is not established. There is no reason that there can't be a reason that is completely not qualified by either of those two. For all parties in a debate, it's going to be either seen as something that's known by a mistaken valid cognition or a non-mistaken valid cognition, one of the two.
Oh yeah. Tenda we go ne majuba joba des lingden jiki chidara kya langba tumbani chidara tishin shebe sungbe shir sheba dini ki go ne taba zeba sewa inus. Ta karsana 다 딘다디 ngar kondu sheba nangshin ki tinzi majubi kyun yoba di lobe lingden jiki kanisi kya langba re kya langba tuyen di ta tsiksaki shungdi nangna majuwe dila tenda wani joba di lingden jiki chidara kya langba tumbadi ta tishin shebe sungbe shir ta dila janirwa 된 간데스니 아니 다기 콘도 라와나시 체라마 유고 조게 따데라 로벨린디지기 바 가봉체인데로 쩐제체인데 저런 디진시비 숭베 치세디 디니 관계된 자 개발도 마집에 디진시비 숭만이 요 말에 다된 디진시비 숭바된 된남도 숭바 있나니 아니 우마발라마주 군조도 숭발라 있나 디니 계란나 마주베 스네오다 딘데기 딱바 체니 숭바 디 낭신신이 디당 딘다디 아니 가리레 유베 치스디 아니 가스나 가스나 딘수 관계 제발도 마치비 여바지 샤요 말했어. 유산에다 된담게 온도 집이 여발 나와 있느니 아니 우마발라드니 딘지 마조 연구래 아니 대 군습기 나왔느니 우마발라 딘지 마조비 껴 요래 유산이 아니 딘지 마조비 껴인데 딜라 자야디 로벨이 이제 코랑기 제라마로 균지 지와당 아니 딘다 빠네 다와토베 숭회기 직바 직장디 균지 충발했어. 그와 민두산에 다른 얘기 계랑 발했어. 계랑에디 계랑 송당디 다 딘지디 고네 로치라 몰라 바 균지치디 딘데스니 균지치인데 아니 코랑게다 응고스 케말레노 되나더니 케랑고 차기레스 가스나 제라 몰라 딘데스디 제라나 다르와스 균지 아니 코랑라 바 도나 로와 균지 충비 고네더니 아니 케랭 고와디 두고레스 어두스
Baba Viveka himself asserts that this kind of analysis leads to positing that a syllogism's reason is not established. To show how Baba Viveka asserts this, Chandrakirti cites Baba Viveka's analysis in terms of the two truths, conventional and ultimate, of his opponent's reason, because the Tathagata had said so. Contrary to the interpretations proposed above, that analysis is not at all meant as an analysis. Okay, so that's enough for what Geshe said. So again, looking at what Baba Viveka says in this passage from Chandrakirti, another passage from Chandrakirti citing Baba Viveka's refutation and fault and flaw that he's pointing out of the Vaibhashikas, right? So he's saying that, okay, so this is, how is it that Baba Viveka accepts implicitly the points that we have just made, right? As Tsongkhapa keeps referencing that phrase, the points that we have just made. So how is it that he accepts them? Well, again, since he's using as his reason, because he's pointing out the flaw in the reason of the Vaibhashika, where they say because the Tathagata has said so. Okay? Because the Tathagata said so is the reason the Vaibhashikas give for their syllogism. And so the flaw that Bhavavekas points out in that is to say that, well, the Vaibhashikas, you guys haven't made any, you haven't said, is he saying it in terms of the ultimate or in terms of the conventional? So is he saying it ultimately or is he saying it conventionally? So you can't just leave it as, completely unqualified by anything. You have to pick one or the other. And if you say it's in terms of the ultimate, then it's not established for the essentialist. If you say he's saying it in terms of the conventional, it's not established for the Madhyamikas. So therefore, there's a flaw that the reason is not established. So that was Bhavavega's own way of finding a flaw in the Vaibhashika's position. That if you don't make any qualification, you can't make any qualification. You can't neglect to make a qualification. You have to choose either ultimately or conventionally. So now Chandrakirti is pointing out that, well, that flaw that he's identified is actually falling on his own syllogisms, right? His own way of positing the syllogism. Again, take the subject, the eyes, and so forth. They are not produced from themselves because they exist like consciousness. So, he's saying that even though he hasn't directly, Chandrakirti is saying that even though Bhavaviveka hasn't directly, kind of accepted that there's a flaw in his own syllogism, that, the not qualifying the subject or the reason in his own syllogism is flawed, he has to actually accept it because he's already gone and pointed out that flaw in the Vaibhashika's syllogism. So, when it comes down to it, he also has to accept that that flaw exists in his syllogism.
Oh yeah, 도체. 다티 되니 대신 셰베 군주도 송비치를 셰바 다수 고담 되놈도 송비치 셰 다수 그제 딱바 제반이 예마인데스. 말 총알 랑바 따르스. 아니 최진 대주 관계 이제 제발도 마제바 샤 고지스. 신도는 고 지고 강로지라 마주바 교베스. 되바 신도 땡지다 빼라 소바 대달 되베스. 라바 텐더베 따죄라 용수 조베 반지다디 추와 갈라시스다. 다 가르쳐 왔으나 여기 아니 디진셰비 송베 지세 되게 디니게 딱바 제비고네 안 띵세 마주베 되니 캐랑 송와레 세게 디 튼다데 간데레스나 딜라양 다게 가지 니기 제시 잡던 순수와 아니 여기 얘기 가르래 빠낸다와 잡이 전장 인생에 알아봐 가지 민자와 니기 제시 잡던 순수와 디 나시 말에 세들와 디진셰비 군주도 송베 치르스니 다국인배 된다마 송베 치르스니 다국인배에서 딘데기 따바치와디 말에 스타든다디 가지래 로벨인데지기 제라마라 쫀진시디로와 아니 디신시비 송베시리스 다디 디신시비 송베시리스 오세 따디라 따바치인데 저런 아니 디신시비 된다마 송베시리스인데 군주도 송베시리스 따바치와 디주고 말에스 디주고 말에 딩아라바 다기 가지기 나로와 디니 따바치와 인스 디 말에스 아니 디니 다 딘주 관계장으로와 딘주 관계장 개발도 마체베스 아니 딘이 따지 샤오레스 로벨은 이제 그런 경님만 송으로와 가스나 딘주 관계 개발도 마체베 따 지점바 샤그레 빼나 담미다바 주디 자 지점바 샤오도 왔으니 어디 빼자니 로벨은 이제 송으로 어디 다가 낭신신이 딘다 디양 디신십에 송베지 세저로와 어디 딘주 관계장 개발도 마체베 아니 디신십에 송거지 세지 로벨은 이제 딘주 딘지 샤 로와 아니 된담기 당 군접 나와 있나 아니 치고르와 되넘기더니 디신십에 숨알라노니 아니 가리래 나고 우마발라 마주 아니 군접도 숨베시스나니 아니 치고 장제발라 마주바 어다 딘데베다 치게 장제바스 왔다 제라모알라 마주베 제라모에 디신십에 숨베시 다 고해들라 디신십에 군접도 딘수 관계장을 개발도 마주베 디신십에 숨바지 샤고레마도 지기 디니게 개발도 주 되넘비더니 숭발하잖아니 우마발라 두고 말에 아니 가리래 군주도 숭발하잖아니 아니 제라마 저랑 두고 말어 와 인도선 딘수 관계 처벌도 맞춰봐 직세데 로벨인데 지기 되게 딘수 관계도 처벌도 맞춰be 다 지점도 로벨인데 지기 되버렸어 인도산에다 티 되와 나신 딘즈다 벨라 소바장 안 딘즈 강이 체벌도 마체바지 샤고와 되와 어 딘즈 강을 강릉이 체벌 체바지 샤긴베 딘즈 강릉 체벌 마체와 샤긴베 이사 딘즈 강릉 체벌 마체바지 샤고레스 루벨인지 되바디 가게 강을 총알 랍당 찍바 지장 어 딘데 왜 탄이 락바지 루벨은 니지게 되니 딘데신이 마티 샤와레마도 지게 견담도 숭배 군주도 숭왔은 딘데게 파 가지라라도 대니 강이 제버도 마치베 지 샤워를 양 소소로 캐는 시도 양 노가지 샤와이나 아니 추와 체계로 와 인도 아니 블로벨은 이제 반지다 다 하지 말했어 개바 침부래 스타 저미지 순고래 반지다 디 추와 칼라스 있으나 블로벨은 이제 와 대니베 슝루 침부 강가라 장바베 시우지 침부 자주 개바 침부 딘데지 내가 추고 말했어 인도 아니 인다 딱바 제디 딘주 강이 이제 개버도 마치비 딘시비 순고지 따라 샤워래 어디 샤워를 루벨인지 송유도 아니 반에 다와 잡아 이양 아니 유비칠세데 딘주 강이 개발도 마치비 요바지 샤고도 디 아니 요 말아와서 어다 디 메다 아니 딘지 마주비 견도 세도 어다 딘데지 돈이 땅거리마도 지기 전남도 송아래 군주도 송아래선 딘데게 카도 대만 이게 딱바 제와디 아니 가지 나에게 응아라비 세와나시 말해 소다 디 저름지기 아니 무슨 세가 되는 것도
Baba Viveka himself, oh, we read that, right? No, I don't think we did. Okay. Baba Viveka himself asserts that this kind of analysis leads to positing that a syllogism's reason is not established. To show how Baba Viveka asserts this, Chandakirti cites Baba Viveka's analysis in terms of the two truths, conventional and ultimate, of his opponent's reason, because the Tathagata said so. Contrary to the interpretations proposed above, that analysis is not at all meant as an analysis of whether the stated reason is because the Tathagata has said so conventionally or because the Tathagata has said so ultimately. Why? As explained above, it is Baba Viveka's position that you must posit the subject without qualifying it either as real or unreal. So, yeah, just as Baba Viveka accepts that subjects with such qualification would not be established for one or the other of the parties, he likewise accepts that such is the case for the reason, the example, and so forth. So the point to actually emphasize here is that the point that Geshe kind of gave the most commentary on is that contrary to the interpretations proposed above, that analysis is not at all meant as an analysis of whether the stated reason is because the Tathagata has said so conventionally or because the Tathagata has said so ultimately. So here, what we have is the reason given by the Vaibhashikas that that Baba Viveka finds the flaw in is because the Tathagata has said it, and what he is accepting, how is he sort of implicitly accepting that there's this flaw in his own syllogism, his own reasoning? It's because what is he saying? He's saying that the first of all, it's not the way that those two earlier misinterpretations had said it. So that's right. That's important. That Songkap is pointing out, contrary to the interpretations proposed above. So what are the interpretations proposed above? Is just that Chandakirti is pointing out a flaw that if Baba Viveka says that he doesn't qualify in terms of the conventional, in terms of the ultimate, he doesn't qualify his reason, then that's the flaw. That's where there's a flaw. So it's not that. That's not the reason he is citing the analysis of Baba Viveka it's again, you know, even though he is pointing out that the Vaibhashikas haven't qualified whether the Tathagata said it conventionally or the Tathagata said it ultimately. You know, he's already said that, he's already accepted that, oh, you don't have to, I mean, you have to posit as your reason and as your example and as your subject and predicate every part of the syllogism. You have to posit something that's not qualified as being either true or false, right? So you have to posit just something that is the mere generality for the reason. So again, in the reason, in the syllogism that is the main top point of analysis, that would be the reason because it exists, right? So you just give the generality because it exists, not as true, not as false, just because it exists, not qualified by anything. So, so then Bhavaveka, but Bhavaveka is pointing out this flaw in the Vaibhashika, that, oh, you didn't say whether you are intending to, that the reason is because the Tathagata said it ultimately or the Tathagata said it conventionally. If the Tathagata is saying it ultimately, then it's not established by the Madhyamikas. If the Tathagata is saying it conventionally, then it's not established for the Vaibhashikas. So therefore there's a flaw that the reason is not established. So that's what Bhavaveka has, accepted in how he's finding the flaw in the Vaibhashika position. So, he's, but the thing is that the misinterpretation is to say that, he's only pointing out, or the misinterpretation is to say that, even in his own reason, then he has to say whether it's, established, whether it's the reason is ultimately or conventionally, because basically the as Tsongkhapa points out here, what does it say here? Vega's position. Therefore, if Bhavaveka had faulted the essentialist reason by applying qualifications such as conventionally and ultimately, his argument would be a gross self-contradiction. How could this consummate scholar make such an error? So he does understand that if he were to say, Bhavaveka, meaning Bhavaveka, he's not making, the error he's making is more subtle than what the previous misinterpretations were saying. So this is the point. He's not that stupid, essentially, is what I mean to say it. How could this consummate scholar make such an error? So the error is not as obvious as just to say, oh, well, he's pointing out a flaw that the Vaibhashikas didn't say, is the Tathagata saying it ultimately or conventionally. Therefore, in his own reasoning, it's the flaw that he's making but not seeing is that he has to qualify his reason as ultimately or conventionally, even though he's contradicting himself by saying it doesn't have to be qualified that as either of those. So, so he understands that if you were to qualify, a subject or a reason in either of those two ways as being real or false, or true or false, then it would be not established for one of the two parties. He understands that he's not making such an obvious mistake. So it's yeah. So that's just the point Tsongkhapa is making. It's a more subtle mistake that he's making than what the previous interpretations that Tsongkhapa is correcting, the misinterpretations are saying.
Yeah. Tena che, Tishin Shepi, Sungbe Chiri Shepi, Tati Tuyende, Dini Kanyin She, Tiwa Yimbes, Kunzuba Inani Rani Tedra Midu Berangla Majulas. Tuyan Tamba and Inani Nyegi, Tuyan Tamdo Jubi, Jibu Yoba, the Meba Nigala, Julia Jeva Gabe, Yela Mujujing, Dini Kandoyan, maybe Tuyani Midube, Tesawa Zimigus, 다 다 된다 디숭와 된다 디신십이 숭배 시세들 가지게 디숭수와 군도도 숭와래 되남도 숭바르스는 세가 제조 된디 세가 제고 말해스 제메고 되가스는 된다 디신십이 숭배 시세디 데니 강경 마인비 디신십이 숭바지 요 말해스 이제는 데니 나라 뒤니셔는 군도당 되남 가로를 마대와 임베 아니 가리래 신디네 데니 기르와 군도바 주베디니 디십이 숭바를 쓰기인데 된남도 교화지를 쓰기인데는 딘디에서는 막 바와래 스마도 담보라니 된남래 군조를 쓰니 딘디가 딱봐 세가 제고 말해서 가서는 딘이 가야 마인비 취지 아니 니게 캐딩 말해서 좋아 나 딘다 로베린디지게 시고 말해 발로비 딘이 총아되게 지라모에게 디 캐딩고 말해 이두자니 다 딘이 가야 마인비 아니 따지 샤요 말해 그래서 딘이 관계 온도시는 샤와래스 인도산이 독신이 다 로벨인데지기로와 아니 데니 강경도 좀 지와 왔다 디 지와 디 로벨인데지기 뭐 말을 지네 아니 데니기 나네더니 아와 군주 아니 가스나 가리래 추비츠 메뉴된 그 군주 이나니 아니 네 가스나 오늘 뭐 저랑 되고 말아봤어 아니 가리래 마주바 된담기로와 아니 담 갈어다 된 담바로 유비로와 된 담바 유바 이나니 다 우마비룰라 퇴연 담바 유비 취지 아니 가스나 퇴연 담바 유비 되니 뭐뭐 간디지와 이나요 규제를 깨와 되고 말해 인도산에 다 규제를 깨와 가스나 퇴연 담바 되니 규제 깨와 인데 대신십에 송배에 시스니 그래서 퇴연 담바 대신십에 송와디 아니 네 진대에 다 송회게 아니 최신식 믹소 다 지르와 지난 게 믹소 두술라 아니 깨봐 주비 규유와 디신십이 송와지 유니 켈링 말해 퇴연 담바 요바디 소다 퇴연 담바 요바디 아니 지부 요바디 뭐 간게 온도시네 디 요바디 깡 거래 수마베 인도산이 다 준다도도 가리래 디니 가야 마인비 아니 가리래 아니 치담바지 송와지 매베 디니게 딱바 제와이나 저랑 가리되긴베 인자 떼지 마주비 규연도 스노다 디규연 당연히 아니 당당 딘레레마도 당보라니 퇴연 담바 온도시네 송와래 군조동도 송을선 딘레게 세가 제거예요 말해스 디 어디다 제르미지 송해 디든다디 로벨 인딘지기 아니 마게 뭐와라 된다 균주치디 균주치단디 딘레스는 제스다 제르미지 송도
가리 서가치 그리고 말에 전동도인데 군조도인데
맞다. 자기 가지 되게 이게 가지 알아봐 가지 되게 퇴연담바 송아래 군조도 송아래 했으니 그와 딜라 딱바 제발에 쓰고 그와 이게 중화디 퇴연담바 중화래 군조비 중화래 했으니 나와 나신 뒤 임바디 가서는 퇴연담바 송아래 군조도 송아래서 딱바 제도 딜라 세가 되는 거야지 셰와와 티 세가 되면 말해스 데니 관계자 개발도 마제비 쉬진지 자요 말해 아니 데니가 온도 제와이나 군조도 송아래 퇴연담도 송아래스 딘데시는 말 최와래 모두지 카두고는 된남도 송와래 군조도 송와래스니 로벨인데지기 아니 막에 응외모를 지와대 땅요 말해스 어떤 제름지다 대시디 되자고 로벨인데지기 응외모를 지와지 땅와로 봐 응외모하기로와 친하게 응외나 깨와집이 규요대 디디시비 송외실 빼난 양을 대비 시와 송가신 디라로와 디 딘지들라더니 견제치디 아니 데니 관계 처벌도 마집이 시자마지 디신십에 송아요 말에 다 데니가 온도 제왔는데 퇴연담바 송아래 군조도 송아래 했으니 아니 딘데 지신이 마 데니게 딱바디 쳐와래 모두지 카도 아니 퇴연담바 송아래 군조도 송아래서 딘데 카도 지와딜래요 말에 데니 관계 이제 제벌도 마치비 아니 따지 디신십에 송아지요 말에 데니가 온도 제와 있나더니 신이 딘데스니 오둑신이 마 교연 땅난디 지발렙단이 딘데레스
So yeah, the specific point being made here is a little bit too subtle for me to see clearly. But I'll try my best to just read the text and make sense of it. So, me meaning as the interpreter, not Geshe. Okay. Contrary, did we get through that whole? Yeah. We got through that. So this is starting on the last paragraph of 264. Therefore, the correct interpretation of Baba Viveka's argument is as follows. Which of the two truths is the referent of the reason? Because the Tathagata said so. If it is the conventional one, it is not established for you, the essentialist, since you do not accept that the reason refers to a conventional object. and if it is the ultimate, it is not established for me, since I refute the ultimate production of an effect from a cause that is existent, non-existent, or both, as well as production that is causeless. Since neither party accepts that there is an object that is neither of the two truths, it is not necessary for Bhava Viveka to clear that up. Okay, so we're again looking at the sort of misinterpretations of Chandakirti from other Tibet. From other Tibetans, and then Tsongkhapa pointing out that, right, that those interpretations don't make sense, that they are misinterpretations. So, again, the reason that we're looking at, right, Bhava Viveka is pointing out a flaw in the Vaibhashika give the reason, take the subject, how was it phrased? Take the subject, the causes that serve to bring about the internal sensory faculties, internal sensory faculties and such are existent without qualification because the Tathagata said they are. So the reason is because the Tathagata said they are. That's what Bhava Viveka is finding the flaw in, that reason. So he's asking again to the Vaibhashikas, are you saying that the Tathagata said it ultimately, or did he say it conventionally? Is the Tathagata speaking ultimately, or the Tathagata speaking conventionally? Okay, so there's, right, because there's no speech of the Buddha or right, nothing the Buddha is saying where he's saying it either, not in either terms of either the two truths. He's either saying it in terms of conventional, or he's either saying it in terms of the ultimate. There is right, but then the wrong interpretation was the people who are saying, the other Tibetan scholars who are saying, that is it conventional truth or is it false? Is it conventional truth or an ultimate truth? Is it a truth? Is it true or is it false? Right? And like, again, true means the ultimate. Anyway, is it true or is it false, or is it ultimate truth or is it conventional truth? Those are two ways of saying the same thing. So that's not what Bhava Viveka is. That's not the flaw that Bhava Viveka is pointing out, and that's not how Bhava Viveka's, right, the flaw in his syllogism is to be understood. Because why? That none of the Buddhist schools, neither the Vaibhashikas nor the Madhyamikas themselves, right, ourselves, none of us would accept that there is something that exists that is neither of the two truths. So you don't even have to ask the question, which of the two truths is it, right? Or is it, is it not qualified as either of the two truths? There's nothing that is there can't be something that is neither of the two truths. Everything is one or the other. So that's accepted by all the Buddhist schools, Vaibhashikas and Madhyamikas. So we're not the flaw or the question that comes in the analysis isn't to say is the reason ultimate or is it conventional? It's just asking, when Bhava Viveka is, right, making this analysis of the Vaibhashika reason, he's asking, did the Tathagata say it conventional, in terms of conventional truths, or did he say it in terms of ultimate truth? So that's how Bhava Viveka was intending, right? The meaning of Bhava Viveka's analysis there. And so again, Tsongkhapa now pointing out that here's how he says, if it is the conventional is not if it is the ultimate, it is not established for me, since I refute the ultimate production of an effect from a cause that is existent, non-existent, or both, as well as production that is causeless. Since neither party accepts that there is an object that is neither of the two truths, it is not necessary for Bhava Viveka to clear that up. Right? So again, the Madhyamikas, Bhava Viveka, and the Madhyamikas don't accept that there's anything that is an ultimately existent phenomenon that ultimately arises from conditions and causes. So that wouldn't be, saying something ultimately like that wouldn't be established for the Madhyamikas. Saying something conventionally exists wouldn't be established for the essentialists. And so when we have the syllogism, take the subject, the eyes and so forth, they are not ultimately produced because they exist like consciousness. Then again, looking at the reason because they exist, you don't have to say, oh, because we're not saying that you have to specify because they ultimately exist or conventionally exist, because that doesn't need to be cleared up. That's not something that's required in the analysis. It's not, so again, the main point being, this analysis made by Bhava Viveka is not to say, oh, you fail to designate which of the two truths you're talking about. That's obvious that there's no non-qualified. I mean, that if you just make the reason without qualifying as either of the two truths, it's obvious that doesn't exist. A third thing that is neither of the two truths. That's not the point being made. The point being made is simply that that the Bhava Viveka is saying that you failed to qualify whether the Buddha is saying it in terms of the ultimate or the Tathagata is saying it in terms of the conventional.
Oh yeah. Oh, do che. That in the Kotosanti Jones. Kotosan. Tell Kasata de Kuba, Tasukuba, Jungate, Dini Kanshi, Chivangamatawa English, the Tela Dini Kandu Yang, maybe Tony, Midube, Tesawazimigochi, Tela, Junga in Bichir, Shekobana, Tasukubi, Jungate, Dini Kanshi, China, Ngamata Tawa Ingi, Dini Kasa, Deni, Junga, Kang Tasukuji, Manani Chonga, Denmark, starting at the tin다디 딱바 지당디 디니기 딱바 지당디 와 십자 다 지당기다 측이 신점 신자 지당디 송고를 저름지 가스나 베나 사주je 되는데 막 사용고 뭐 명인데 중화 인베실 시비 중화 인베실 시비 다들라 대만이게 딱바 지게나 아니 가리래 자기 가지기 라이나시 되는담배 되니 온도진이 중화 인베실 라인베 군주봉 온도진 중화 인베실 디말라와치 와 디니 관계에 되면도 는 싸움이 되지. 다수급의 중화대 디니 강의 있은 지나 아니 뒤따다거라 와 너네 디니 중화대 군주 가서 군주 대말에 되는 대말에 했으니 딱봐 제발이나 딱봐 제 요건지 레모도 지기 군주 dembe jungwa dasu guyimbe tönam dembe jungwa dasu guyimbe sina tine takpa rosa kore yo mares rwa tönam dembe jungwa seji da chonga sukanji kele yo marwa rwa nga gogiye kele ngo mare chigogiye kele ngo mare jungwa imbe je jungwa di tönam demba da kunzo demba kanun 가리레스 tini kanya maimbe 아니 jungwaji yo mares takpa chena chiye yo res da di maimbaji 아니 가리레 군수 dembe jungwa dasu guyimbe tönam dembe jungwa dasu goba 있으니 치바 땅와 있나 아니 까비 총아 로벨인데 지기 공부 때문에 많은 말이에요 로벨인데 지기 아니 가스나 군수 dembe jung와다 tönam dembe jungwe 가서 tönam dem바 요바다 군수 dem바 요바 온도신이 송을 말아 가스나 추비치면여도다 마추비치면여도 시자신이 송을 와 인도산이 아니 딘디 중화 인베시를 세더라 계속 대만이게 따바치니라고 해나 중화디 대만이부 강릉 가리래 스파트와디 땅와디 디그리마도 지 전남 dembe 중화 다수국은 배 군도 dembe 중화 다수국에서나 아니 갑디 총하게 공부 로벨인지 지게 되니 여기 이제 케랑당 균이 대화에 봐 차주 그래스 누산에디 데니게 딱바치 단들라요 양년딩기 대만이게 년딩 자야게 개봐요레스 어디 저름지게 다 두선 십자 송도
Well then, oh no, we're still above there. Okay, so this is the second paragraph on page 265. You may interpret Bhavaveka's question to his opponent as, when you say, because it is an element, which of the two truths is the element that is posited as the reason? This interpretation is correct in that it is just like what we have explained above. However, if you claim that Bhava Viveka is asking in terms of which of the two truths, i.e. ultimately or conventionally, is the element stated as a reason, then you completely misunderstand the position of the opponent of the clear words, that is Bhava Viveka. So then, it is valid or, a correct kind of analysis to say, well, which of the two truths is it, right? So again, the misinterpretation was connecting the flaw of Bhava Viveka, pointing out the syllogism, flaw in the syllogism of the Vaibhashikas, connecting it to Bhava Viveka's reason, take the subject earth, right? It is not ultimately of the nature of solidity because it is an element like the wind. So, right, so the question can be, when you say because it is an element, which of the two truths is the element, right? Is it either a conventional truth or an ultimate truth? So that's a fine question. I mean, it's a reasonable question to analyze. That's not a problem to make that analysis. Okay, that's acceptable or fine. And so Tsongkhapa says that interpretation is correct. That's just what we have explained above. However, if you claim that Bhava Viveka is asking in terms of which of the two truths is the element stated as the reason, okay? So are you saying that? So it's a subtle difference here that's hard to capture, I think, partly because of just the difference in the language usage. But again, it's sort of being qualified conventionally or ultimately versus, saying an ultimately produced or an ultimately existent element versus a conventionally existent element is sort of the wrong question, right? The wrong question. Whereas just asking the question, is it an ultimate truth or a conventional truth? That's a fine question, or that way of making an analysis is accepted by Tsongkhapa and Chandrakirti. But to ask, is it ultimately are you saying, because again, we're talking about whether or not the reason can be left unqualified or not, right? So the whole point, Chandrakirti is saying you can't actually have an unqualified reason, completely unqualified, but he's not saying that the qualification that has to come in is an ultimately existent, whatever the reason is here, element, an ultimately existent element or a conventionally existent element. Because Bhava Viveka, the whole, again, you have to, following the discussion or the text itself of the clear words, that's the basis of this whole, section here. We're looking at Chandrakirti's clear words. So following the layout of the text itself, he's pointing out all these different parts of Bhava Viveka's position, and it started with talking about whether or not the objects like the eyes and so forth, whatever subject or predicate or reason you're talking about, is an object found by a mistaken valid cognition or a non-mistaken valid cognition. So that's the qualification that you can't avoid making. Is it an object found by whether it's either an object found by a mistaken valid cognition or an object found by a non-mistaken valid cognition, and you can't just say that there's something that's completely unqualified by either of those. So okay, so yeah, so that's the point being made here, that it's incorrect to say that to interpret the analysis that Chandrakirti is making of Bhava Viveka, to say the flaw in Bhava Viveka's reason is that he didn't qualify whether it's ultimately an element or conventionally an element. That's not the correct interpretation of Chandrakirti. However, it is still fine to just ask the question and make an analysis. Well, is the element, the reason because it's an element, is that a conventional truth or an ultimate truth? That's okay to do, but that's sort of like a side point, not the main point here.
도체 다 대다를 디니 칸이 티비네 된담 이나니 랑라 마주 군소 비나니 신라 지들 가서 군주비는 신라마로 시다 주용돼서 대다로 많이나 최신 샵에 남게 깨지자 군주도 유배시를 치고 대다게 마주바 유배시로 왔다. 여기 강대가 지름지 했단다. 근데 왜 아니 중화디 아니 대만이 가리래 쓴 나와 있는 디 따바디 시초하지. 대만이기 되니 가서 군주도 dembe 중화당 두남 dembe 중화스 나와 있나 다 두남 dembe 중화이나 우마바랑을 랑라 마주브 신티다 디고레스 이나 군주도 예배 중화 나와 있나 아니 마주바 디 두투고 말레스 가서나 군주도 예바 세데로 군주 dem바 세다 군주 dem바 인 세다 군주도 예 세니 베들로 같이하데로 군주도 예바 세데다 군주도 여바디 탄입이 체명을 여바디로와 군주도 여메세데로와 아니 군주도 여바디 아니까 그 중하게 되니 바로 그 켈링 말이스사 요 말이스 군주도 여비 중화 메스사 요 말이 가서는 중화도 군주도 요레스 최진 계시되는 남기 깨지는 군주도 여비 시리스 남기 깨지는 와 인도선에 다 군주도 여비 아니 중화 나와 있나 마주스사 요 말이 중화디 군주도 요레스 인도선에 다 대값도 시줘야 되가서나 군주도 예비 중화라에다 군주 dem비 중화세니 개바샤니로와 군주 dem바 이민세디 아니 가리래 추비 치면녀들 들아 군주 dem바 마추비 치면녀들 들아 되는 dem바 다 군주도 여바스들 군주도 유매지 군주디 탄입이 치명으로 유매지로와 라니 여바 조직로 탄입이 치명으로 요나 군주도 여바스 이두산에다 아니 딘데 양무마웨 딘다 군주도 여비 미소 메시기 말이스 군주도 여바 시작이레스 인자고 탄입이 치명으로 여바 시작고레스 이네 군주 덴바 레베스는 따다디고레스 모두 군주도 여비 미소 따수 군베 되는 데 미소 따도 고위스나 아니 군주도 여바 세디라나 아니 추진 심마도 교연 차기레 딘데 저중고 말이스 이두산다 십자 가리스고스나 군주도 여비 미소다 군주 덴비 미소니라 제바샤니 군주도 유비 미소 세디 아니 가리레 바로비 켈레야지 군주 데미 미소 세디 바로비 켈말링이 로와 근데자니 디체인데 다 된남 데미 아니 가리레 진리 중화디 군주 데마레 된남 데마레 라야당 군주도 요레 된남도 요레 세니 지원이 미라와 차고 다 된다도 로와 군주 데마레 된남 데마레스는 디니게 딱 받쳐와데 다다 쳐와지 군주도 요를 된놈도 요르스나 뒤 대니게 답아쳐 두고 말이 실은 군주도 위찹 세게 다르와 탄니 라니 여바 조직을 로디라 아니 군주비샤니 팀으로 여바들라 군주도 여바스 로와 실은 군주도 위찹 세제로 어디 뒤 원도전이 인도산이 다 된다 저름지기 십자 뛰어야 되다 얘기들아 친이다 딘데 십자 치고래 에스 십자 디세가 뚱도 응
Finish that. Okay, no. Of the two truths. Okay, if that is what Bhavaviveka meant, then how could he say to his opponent, of the two truths, which is it? If the ultimate, then it is not established for us, and yet if conventional, it is not established for the other party. If it were possible to claim that Bhavaviveka's analysis refers to things existing ultimately and conventionally, then since the internal sensory sources that he posits as the subject in his syllogism, refuting ultimate production exists conventionally, that subject would not be established for those essentialist opponents. So this is again connecting back up to what was said just earlier, that when we look at, for instance, the sign or the reason posited as because it's an element, then it's fine to make the analysis. Well, is the element the reason an element, or the elements is that an ultimate truth or a conventional truth? Okay, that's fine. But the difference now is between that and then now analyzing, is it a conventionally existent element or an ultimately existent element? So being conventionally existent just means that it's something that exists within the perspective of a conventional valid cognition. Okay, but so being a conventional truth is then something different. So asking, is it, which of the two truths is it, a conventional truth or an ultimate truth, versus asking, is it ultimately existent or conventionally existent? Those are different questions, okay? So the point Tsongkhapa says at the end, right, if it were possible to claim that Bhavaveka's analysis refers to things existing ultimately and conventionally, okay, then since the internal sensory sources that he posits as the subject in the syllogism refuting ultimate production exist conventionally, that subject would not be established for those essentialist opponents. Okay, so if it exists, if it's an established base, if it exists, and it's necessarily something that exists conventionally. Kunzop de yoba sana rangni yoba jajigi lo kunzop
Rani
di lo
yoba
ena.
jokchegi, Rani yoba jokchegi, lo tseming yona, kunzubdo yoba is.
Eming or yena.
kunzubdo yoba, da dyonum shidumlo kunzubdo yobi chapsedi.
Ja,
Ine shidumlo kunzub denba yinbi cheng marwa.
ja,
kunzub denba yin se da kunzubdo yoy se ni loga chawari. Ine zani tiki jirimji shibja cheyadi. kunzubdo yobi miso kuyinbe, tunumdo yobi miso kuyinbe sin ti takba shinda diga maris. 중화 di kunzub deni kanyin sin pa takba chewadi tada diga res. Kesi dinde kunzubdo yobi 중화 tunamdo yoba lawa ina, tunam도 yoba uma bala maduba injang, kunzubdo yoba paru bala maduba seyadi disa yomare, paru bi kunzubdo yoba chelingi res. kunzub denpa yinpa cheling wa mare. Kasi chubi si menye do yinda rangluki shishashin kunzub denpa sedi chubi si menye do di shaarwa yindir kuyo ma chubi si menye do cheling marwa. O dire.
So that again, being a conventional truth for us as a Prasangika, conventional truth means is equivalent to an object found by mistaken valid cognition. An ultimate truth is equivalent to an object found by non-mistaken valid cognition. So that's the question to be asking. That is the analysis that's being made by Chandrakirti to Bhavaviveka. Now, if we say that instead, the analysis is again now looking at the syllogism, take the subject, the eyes, and so forth. They are not ultimately produced because they exist like consciousness. If you're saying that, well, are the eye, if you're asking about the eyes, are they conventionally existent eyes or ultimately existent eyes? Well, this question doesn't make any sense because we all accept that they're conventionally existent eyes. That's the essentialists and the essentialists and the Madhyamakas accept that. So that's not kind of making the point if you ask that question. And again, for in reality, or for us, if something exists, it's necessarily conventionally existent, and that means that it has something conventionally existent means that it has a mind, a valid cognition that posits it as existing. Then Rangni jogjegi yuba jogjegi lo gare?
Lo tsema shidumlo tsemi ngoro yubi chabla gorwa. Tsemi jubi chawa inzang kunzubdo yubi chab sedi tsemi ngoro yubadila.
Okay. So just Geshe just added the point that saying that something exists conventionally in Prasangika, in our system, our understanding, saying that something exists conventionally is just another way of saying that it exists in the perspective of a valid cognition. Because if it exists, it's necessarily conventionally existent. It's necessarily exists in the perspective of a valid cognition that that posits it as existing. Oh, that's what saying. Oh.
Yeah. Oda tuzu zoos sasha.
Okay, so there's not much else to explain about this, and the time is up. So we can stop here, and if there are any questions, then we can take the questions. Are there no questions?
지당 티와이 티와데 디 카파 ngazu 카파 이 시와지로 딜nga 주기 던담다 군조 플랜 샤투레 샤투 마르 근데 샤 유나메나
Shock. Yanke sundan konda.
이 시와데 ngazu 이 시와 요로 이 시와데라 던담다 군조 플랜 샤 유나메나
이게 셰바 니 콘섭던 던담 니가
ngazu 이 시와지 요로 ngazu 아니 이 시와디 던담레 라야지다야 군조 플랜 디네 니 카니 샤 유나메나
알레 던담 댐발라인 베 던담 디여발라인 베 다다 에와제도아
군조 다 군조 다 던담 ngani 유메지 요로 왔다 디니 카가니 차
So the question is about our mental consciousness. Are there within mental consciousnesses, are there those that are ultimately existent and those that are conventionally existent? It's just a general question that the questioner has.
그래 근데 네가 소든다 된다며 되니 칼로리다 이세다 군주비 이세 니제요 말레스 이인사비실로 군주비 이지마도 된다며 이세지 샤요 말레스 이네 당가게 가술라 아니 군주비 창주쌤다 된다며 창주쌤스니 즉 제시지 잡은 거레스 아니 네가서 군주비 창주군으로 군주비 창주쌤다 된다며 창주쌤세 된데 지요티 인다 네가서 된다며 군주비 디 군주디 말레스 와 아니 가스나 동용 무슨 뜻도 이시라 되니 된담비 이기 셔봐 아니 창주스마 군주비전이 창주스 이기 셔봐선 되게 군주비 이당 된담비 이세지 셔줘래 디 아주 된담레 군주비 디 그게지 말했어 디 고아디 로가레스
So we can't talk. There's no sort of division within mental consciousnesses and the mind of, an ultimately existent mind and a conventionally existent mind. If it's all minds are conventionally existent. If it's mind, a mental consciousness is necessarily conventionally existent. However, the term is used, ultimate mind and conventional mind. Those terms do come, especially in Tantrayana and in the mantra tradition. And then there's even more specifically the terms of conventional bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta, conventional awakening mind and ultimate awakening mind. And so those terms do come up, but they have a different meaning. And in that context, they mean something different than sort of the literal. What we're talking about is more literal, something really being ultimately existent or conventionally existent. So all minds are conventionally existent, but when we say the ultimate mind in the mantra or tantra tradition is talking about a mind that's realizing emptiness. So that term is there.
Thank you.
I have a kind of a question. Oftentimes you're talking about the unmistaken consciousness, which is one that sees the true, is omniscient mind, right? And that's not the question. I just want to make sure I'm saying that right. Is that correct? Unmistaken consciousness is
for the the system that Tsongkhapa is following of Prasangika. He's saying that the non-mistaken valid cognitions or consciousnesses are only the Arya's meditative equipoise directly realizing emptiness. So Geshe has clarified that in previous classes, so I'm just saying it because these are, just.
All
But
right.
go on. Do you have another question still? Or?
Well, maybe not. Maybe I'll have to think about this more because I think I'm gonna. Yeah, I think I need to understand something a little bit better to even ask the question.
But well, I just again repeat because Geshe did say it even again today in this class. He said it in other classes. So again, that only the only thing that is the object found by a non-mistaken consciousness, that Arya's meditative equipoise, is ultimate truth or emptiness, and then all conventional truths are objects found by mistaken consciousnesses.
So when someone has achieved Buddhahood and they have omniscient mind,
okay,
That's an unmistaken consciousness as well, correct?
That's that. Again, that Marangi chi Karangi Sung Shimba Kashi Sashi Younger Labi any Dria di Gala Dria Garisana, then as Matrue Sheba Laya di and a Sangi Papa Karangi to give Kamba ya or any Namkin ya Namishin ya Namkin the young Matrue Sheba in base, Matrue Sheba rebis.
탐지 김비 캠바디 가서 마주비 셰바로 와고 낭수다 니수 차탐전에 마주와리 다 심진라 되니 낭자 추와 신자 마주와 세다 낭수다 신즈 니가 추와 세게 로딘이 에와제로와 산다 탐지 김비 이셰라 아니 낭자다 신자 탐전에 되니 마주와 마도지 추비 차다 마주비 차 에와제요 말이에스.
So for the Buddha's omniscient consciousness, the all-knowing consciousness of a Buddha is a non-mistaken consciousness, and it's non-mistaken in all regards. So in regards to the appearance, in regards to the actual comprehension, different way of dividing up how the mind relates to objects, both the appearance and then the comprehension. It's non-mistaken with all of them. So for ordinary being or non-Buddhas, ordinary beings and non-Buddhas, we can say some consciousness might be mistaken with regard to the appearance, but not mistaken with regard to the comprehension. Other consciousnesses could be mistaken with regard to both. For a Buddha, it's non-mistaken in all regards.
But so when they see, so if a Buddha, a living Buddha that's here, and that's emanating in a form, it sees it does it still perceive things as we conventionally perceive them? I'm not perceive them. Do they see them like they see form and everything as we conventionally see conventional form, or do they not even? They just know that it's not
without seeing it. You're saying, do they know it without seeing it? Okay. Any sangi papa bena ngazo dunla chubegi that puppet sangi puppet chubek tugu dabachi. Any ngazo zuk migi tongwa nonshin sangi papa yang migi tongwa is yamana matong ne chi same guys are two the thing is to you so shamba yerebes matong ne kengerebes migi tong ne kengerebes chengi tong ne chengi signe kengerebes
미기 통어마로 다 통행 셰바들라 넘버 셰바 투여로와 미기 넘버 셰바 네 넘버 셰바 젠 유미저 투유들라 투여로와 수다 티로 이제 최여로와 다 최기는 저더니 이기 통한 거로와 단수 나위 퇴행 거로와 진수 네 퇴행 거로와 수군수 미기 통으로와 디는 시ችን 다든다 대양 나와세들 통화 코랑라 딱다지 전에 내가 있는 다 인지 생각하면서 인도전에 아주 나와세들 인지미지 통수도 그 하고 괜찮고 지금 내거라 나와세인데 인지미지 하고 말와 로와 인도전에 산제 바발라더니 산제 바 야미세제 말다 도르수드나 셈디야 치마 탐제다 제용도 아니 셈기 디나더니 추난지에 매와 차고 왔다 나우주기 전에 추난요 말에 신주기 전에 추난요 말에 가슴은 쌤디 나우즈 추나 타다다 채와 어디라 탐지 캠비 이시했어요. 네가 알아서 그거 쌤지 건강을 뒤요래. 쌤지 탐지를 한다는 게 아니 곰잡잡잡더니 아니 뒤게 되니 바게 당승당더니 딩승다 tunzu기 시험에 또 별로 되니 돈용 웃음 또 이시 곰곰곰고니 아니 너자 되니 추나 강가바 까에게 값이 내고 와 뒤뒤 강가 아니 로디 탐지 캠비 이시했어요. 그래. 들라다 추나 레벨 말에 아니 신앙 유 진주게 전에경 추바차야 말이야. 강나와 탐지 대발했어. 강통화 탐지 대발했어. 와 어디 강나와 강통화 강가 대바지 차고해서 추바스디 통화나시 돌아 미네비 값지요나 아니 추바지 리고와 탐지 김비 시들어 디요 말했어. 어딘데 지랑.
그래서 소소기 보기 룩 통화 자기 말했어 그러.
자기 말했어. 수수기 스튜디오 통화인데 수디 아니 유댕기 돈을 주베기 되니 춘낭지 레고를 랑원을 주비 다 산지기 나이도 바 루기 파다서도 유군을 주비 주지 디 나주요 말이스.
Oh, geez. So there's in general, right? So there are 6 consciousnesses that each have their own domain of object, their own object, right? The eye consciousness sees forms, the ear consciousness hears sounds, the nose consciousness smells odors, etc. And the mental consciousness knows all other phenomena or just category of phenomena in general. So then the Buddhas have, and then also in general, there's a little difference between saying seeing and appearing, just to clarify that point. Like when we say that there's something appearing in a consciousness, it's not necessarily being known by the person. It can appear, well, when we say we see something, generally it's more of like a colloquial term, but we, mean generally that we like know it or are aware of it. Something appearing in a consciousness to a consciousness isn't necessarily being kind of cognized. You don't necessarily have awareness of it, but that's like for ordinary beings, right? But that's just another point about the terminology. But so now we're talking about the Buddha, the questions about the Buddha. So the Buddha has, right, the mind has made the mind completely free, purified of all stains, right? Completely removed from all stains. And there's no mistaken appearance. There's no mistaken appearance whatsoever in a Buddha's mind. Those stains have been removed that cause those mistaken appearances by going through the path, recognizing that the grasped object or the conceived object of self grasping, of truth grasping, those don't exist, right? The objects grasped at those minds don't exist. Seeing that, meditating on it, practicing the training of meditating on that correct view over time, completely removed all these stains. So then for Buddha's mind, whatever appears is true. Whatever is seen is true. It's true as it's as it's seen, that's how it is. As it appears, that's how it is for Buddha, everything. So so then in terms of, does a Buddha see objects like we do? Well, no, it's not going to be the same way we see things, because we see things with our mistaken consciousnesses where the objects have the appearance of being established from their own side. For a Buddha, there is no appearance of being an object being established from its own side, whether it's a visual form or anything else, right? So the Buddha has no appearance of objects being established from their own side, so they only know things as being merely designated by conceptuality out there.
아니 빼지 돈이 즉 시엔나로와 빼는 미치기 수부지라 미니기 따윤들로와 미치기 곧 나와도 고랑 니오 이건데 나와도 통으로 수부 통화 직발아 니가 기로와 지기 따도 통화 직발인데 지기 나와도 고랑 게좀 니빈자 되게 곧 나와도 통거래 콜라데는 라디기 곧 빼는 나오면 좋아 통으로 근데 따 통화에도 직발아 수부직 통화 직발해 통화를 돼 수부들은 통수미라고 니 되기도 와 디나시전에 아니 탐지 침비 이식이 수라 따와당 수배는 찌라 탐지 침비 이식이 따야다 심지 이식 따는데 통수미라고 해야지 디나시 내고 그래서
So just to give an example of like the difference between how a Buddha sees things versus how we do, well, if you just look at an ordinary case where there's a person's body and the person's body, two different people see it. One person is like the enemy of the person, and one person likes them, and the one who likes them, they're attracted. They see the body as attractive, the form as attractive, whereas the enemy sees it as unattractive. They don't see it as attractive. So they're both seeing the same body, but the way of seeing is different. So like that, the way of seeing things is different for the Buddhists compared to us.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, on the text on page 262 says, one hidden object such as the eye are posited 2 classes ago. You said an eye can be a hidden object. So this is referencing a couple classes ago. The eye can be a hidden object because a hidden object is one that is realized in dependence on a sign. What is the meaning of dependence on a sign? is it the same as grasping at signs? Says from page 262, grasping at signs. What is the meaning of hidden object? And again, the show hashing on la ya the dunjangni any mi di any 그래서 고기rin la ya chigyo the nature be umarang kubit de la ta chuche de gona any mi 그래서 Kokirins and Kokir Giddingers are not any Talatene Tokore, Talatene Tokobadi, Talatene Topa Tong, any Chenmo Zimbani, Dinchibari base, and as a young Ta Tong Chenma, your Ingigatola, Tani Chiba base dongere, Ta Chenma, Niga Tani Chibara, Inji. Then he Chetang da Kokir Gidding this Shashikaro Jeslam on this.
That 고줄 된다 근데 따라서는 균세라 때문에 된 람나와 균세라 때문에 하 고역이 소소 끼워 넘기서 왔다 소소 끼워 넘기 균세라 때문에 하 고역이 아니 쥐지나 아니 고줄을 세지 그러와 맨다 단 소소 끼워 넘기 웃음도 통 투획이 유지나 아니 운주를 세지 다 뒤라도 다 소소고 고주다 운주고 되는 샤다 민다와요 그러와 다 배나 탄주를 라인은 고줄 당원주니 그 말이스 가서 균생한 달라 뛰네 또 투에나 고줄 차와래 무슨도 통 투에나 운줄 차와래스 이제는 시르나 코토비 제바양 요래 코토비 무슨 세마요 요래 진짜 고줄도 운주니가 인거래스니 뒤숭 거와 이제는 다 도르스드나 고줄을 쓰되 균 답에 무슨도 통마도와 이 균생 먹고 오지 꼬라점 또 그거나 고줄을 쓰되 된대지라 고야지 운주를 쓰되 균생 먹고 싸먹고 하지 고랑게 답에 ngana pele phumba tawji na ko ju ke chago marwa phumba lawdi rwa phumba de khadu ko rang zu tene thong thu bin jirwa da phumba thongi migi ongbo seja migi ongbo lamna migi ongde ko ba de dang zu khadu thong gorde kim namshi ke wa chi bi nibadi 균생 아마데 나 zu khadu thong thu go mara su su ke u gerwa ndu zani ko du wa chaware o dinje tawji to ni de jamna.
Okay, so the meaning of being, so just to understand the terminology here, these signs or sign in these two contexts of the realized independence on a sign versus grasping at signs are two different terms in the Tibetan and Sanskrit languages. So either way, here they're translated as a sign, but for the first one, realize independence on a sign, we could just as well say reason. Okay, that's the equivalent. So realize independence on a reason. So in the second context, that's not referring to reasons, that's something else. So realize independence on a reason, that's what it means to be hidden. So for an ordinary being, if you need to apply reasoning in order to understand or have knowledge of something, then it's hidden. And if it's something that you're able to, as an ordinary being, you're able to just directly perceive it with the direct perception, then it is called an evident phenomenon. So it's not hidden, it's evident. Okay, so there's different ways of positing in the different philosophical systems the difference between evident phenomena and hidden phenomena, but this is, suffice to say, this is, it was fairly a general way of saying it, and for the Prasangika, right, this is how we say it. And actually for Prasangika too, we can even say that, whatever exists is, has both, is both evident and hidden, because it depends on the person who's, right? For some people it's evident, for some people it will be hidden, depending on who the person is. Some people will need to apply reasoning. But anyway, in general, what we're saying is something that is an evident phenomenon, just for example, like a vase or a pot or some simple object, right? Something that you can just directly see without having to think a lot or apply a lot of reasons. You can actually just perceive it directly. So again, in the example that was given in the portion of text there, looking at the position of Shantarakshita and the Yogacharya Svatantrikas, they, even though it says the eyes are hidden phenomena, it's not referring to the eyeball. Remember, it's referring to the eye sensing faculty, the eye power, in other words, right? So what needs to be reasoned is not the thing you can see, the eyeball that we can see, but what you need reasoning to understand is how there is something within that is has the capacity to produce this internal consciousness, the subjective consciousness. So that's what we need reasoning to establish and to know.
That's
Okay, so we'll stop here.
Sa xie bie jie ju xie mian do zhang mang ri zhe ba ling xie nian de jian ba san jie xin do mian de bei wa yin zhu gui nam da xin la jue ba ra xiu ye da mang gu ru ra na mian zhe ka na yan da ya mi kang ri ra wei gu wei xin gang su pen dang de wa ma lu jung mi Jie re si wang dian zin jia zu yin xia bei si di pa dian ju ru ji ka dian du ji kam su chi le ju du ju da bi long do jin lo si nam la ri lam de me de lam de jie bei xie so wan de chang ju sim ju rin bo ji ma jie pa nam jie ju ru ji jie wa nyang ba me ba Kone kondo pewa sho stasi negun sewe menji samo tenze tatang chawe lamang pacho luju yapse gongwa da chishin kondo jubi gyuru ngo jewa di jewo gun sonama ishi tsozo shi sonama ishi lechungbi Tamba kuni to bara shu. Thank you, Tujiche. Good night, all of you.
수치나 심전하고
Thank you. Good night.
Oh, yeah.